1.
You will hear a tour guide talking to a group of tourists who are visiting a cave in Vietnam.
First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 5.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our visit to one of the most famous caves in Vietnam. As you know, this cave is famous for its wildlife, and one of the creatures you will observe in here is the small cave cockroach. They live mostly on the bird and bat droppings that are so plentiful in the caves. The guardrails along the trails are covered with these droppings, and this makes a feast for the cockroaches, so be careful where you put your hands. They will not harm you, but it can be a shock if you touch them. Once you're in one of the main caves, look out for the green centipedes. They will not be on the trail, but can often be seen on the wall close by. They feed on other insects and are fascinating to look at because of their colour and, of course, their many legs. Please do not try to pick one up, though. These centipedes have a very nasty poisonous bite. There are also deep red millipedes. These have a fully rounded shape, and they look like a streamlined elongated train with 100 or so closely packed legs extending right and left. When you get to the large high caves, you should look right up above you for the swifts and bats. The bats in this cave are mostly a type of dwarf bat, which are common in this part of the world. They will be clustered high up against the walls, maybe 100 or 200 together. They look like shadows high on the walls of the cave. They are likely to be very quiet right now, but because there are so many of them together, you will have no difficulty identifying them. They sleep all day until they all leave the cave in a massive flock on their nightly hunt for flying insects. The swifts are the creatures you can see flying around during the day, especially if they have young ones to feed. They can navigate in the darkness here and will fly outside in ones and twos at dusk to catch small winged insects like mosquitoes. However, they tend to return before it's pitch black outside, and they do not hunt at night. The swifts make nests, usually higher up on the ceiling of the cave.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 6 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 6 to 10.
The paths tend to run around the edges of the large caves. Mostly this is because the centre is a mound of guano, the bird and bat droppings. This is also the source of the strong smell inside the caves. You may not like this smell, but the locals know its economic value. They have harvested the products of these caves for centuries. The guano is very valuable as fertilizer, and so it's collected each year, once the young birds have grown and the swifts have abandoned their nests. The guano is not the only valuable byproduct of the wildlife here. As you travel through the caves, you will notice some bamboo structures. These very flimsy-looking sets of poles that go a full 100 metres right up to the roof are what the locals climb up to gather the swifts' nests. These are even more valuable than the guano, as they are the main ingredient in bird's nest soup. Before you begin, it's time for some safety instructions. As you probably know, this is a huge limestone cave that goes about 1 kilometre back into the hills, and in places it's 100 metres in height and 300 metres wide. There's no need to crawl around in here as you do in other caves, but it's dark inside, of course. That's why I insisted you bring a working light. Please check that it shines brightly and ensure that you stay together with others who have a good torch. In one of the larger areas of the cave, the roof is pierced so some sunlight will get through. It is best to turn your torches off if you can see well and save your batteries. It's a good idea to put your waterproof jacket on now. The walls may be wet, but that's not the main reason for the jacket. The bats and birds do excrete, and they are above you, so just in case. And of course, your hat or hood also keeps you safe from animal droppings. It's not advisable to use the guardrails as handholds. There are lots of droppings on those rails, and don't forget the cockroaches. You absolutely must follow the marked trails. The guardrails on either side are put there so that you cannot mistake them. We take no responsibility for your safety if you go over or under the rails into other cave areas. Keep your torches shining on the path whenever you are moving, just to be sure of your footing, and don't try to go too fast. You might trip, and you will certainly miss some of the fascinating wildlife in the cave. Now, it's time to begin the tour.
That is the end of part 1.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turn to part 2.
You will hear a man talking to teenagers about archery. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 13. Listen carefully to the first part of the talk and answer questions 11 to 13.
OK, can you gather round again? Is everyone here? No, we're missing 2. Ah, here they come now. Right, the next activity is the last one before lunch. So, archery. And I can tell you this activity is the favourite of a lot of our visitors. It's great fun and very relaxing. It can also be competitive. I think we should get the idea, have some practice, and then introduce a bit of competition, if you're up for it. Good idea? I'm going to start with the basics. Archery is the practice, or art, some might say, of using a bow to propel an arrow. Archery was initially used for hunting and combat, an important aspect of warfare in the distant past. Today, archery is largely a recreational activity and sport. The very first bows and arrows, and we're going back thousands of years, were very simple. The bow was straight, but bent into a curve when the string was pulled back. The further back the string was drawn, the greater the tension, and the faster and further the arrow flew. Later, bows were designed to be curved. This meant there was an existing inbuilt tension, and the archer, that's you in a few minutes, exerted less energy drawing back the string. When curved bows were not in use, they were unstrung. That means the string was taken off, so that the bow was not left in a state of tension. I think it's interesting that almost every culture had bows and arrows at some point during their development. Of course, we've all seen Native Americans with bows and arrows in the movies, but The very oldest bows originate from Scandinavia and Northern Europe. The use of bows and arrows died out with the invention of firearms, though I must point out that the earliest gunners were far less efficient than an expert archer. Archery as a recreational activity started to become popular not long after that. Anyway, that's enough history. Do go online, though, if you want to know more.
Now you have some time to look at questions 14 and 15. Now listen to the next part of the talk and answer questions 14 and 15.
Right, the practical side. First of all, safety. Now, you might have played with bows and arrows when you were kids, but these bows and arrows aren't toys. They're not dangerous if used properly and safely, but they certainly can be dangerous if used carelessly. So everyone, please stand here on this side of the line until I say otherwise. Nobody walks towards the targets until I say it's safe to do so. When I say so, everyone puts down their bow, and then we can all go into the target area. Each of you will fire one at a time. I don't want to see anyone load their bow when it's not their turn. When you've fired, you put your bow down and wait until it's your turn again. Is that clear?
Now you have some time to look at questions 16 to 20. Now listen to the rest of the talk and answer questions 16 to 20.
Let's take a look at the equipment. The bows are fairly heavy. You might be surprised. We'll spend a moment practicing holding the bow properly before we load one up. I'm holding it now, in the position in which you'll hold it. The drawstring is here, and again you might be surprised at the tension. You'll need to practice drawing back the string. Just above the middle of the bow, here, is the sight. You look through this as you would with a rifle. Using a bow and arrow without a sight is perfectly possible. Most master archers do this, but having one will certainly help you to start off with. Now I'll put the bow down and show you an arrow. The shafts of our arrows are wooden, but fiberglass arrow shafts are now common too. Traditionally, as I'm sure you'll know, the fletching at the top of the arrow, I mean, not the tip end of the arrow, was made of feathers. We have some arrows with feather fletching, but we also have some with what we call vanes. That means the fletching is made of solid plastic. All of you have a quiver with 6 arrows in it. You should tie the strap of the quiver around your waist, like this. As I've said, you take an arrow from your quiver when I say so, when it's your turn and not before. Oh, I nearly forgot. Protection. Everyone has a chest guard and hand guard, like those that I'm wearing. I'll show you how to put the chest guard on in a moment. And a bracer. The bracer's a smaller arm pad that protects the inside of your arm from the string. For those of you in a t-shirt today, that's important. But the bracer will also stop the string catching on the sleeve of a jumper or jacket. Right, so before we pick up the bows, let's have a look at these chest guards.
That is the end of part 2.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turn to part 3.
You will hear a conversation between 3 students who are preparing a presentation. You have 30 seconds to look at question 21. Look at questions 22 to 25.
Hey guys!
Oh, hey Gail, you made it.
Yeah, sorry. I was stuck at the library paying late fees. Have you guys started going through the data yet?
Yeah, we've already collated it and we've started designing the graphs we're going to use in the presentation.
Oh, really? That's fast.
Well, anyway, here's what we've got so far.
Okay, so... Wow, 38% said they thought about quitting school in the first year. That's a huge number.
Yeah, and only 10% said they were happy at school from beginning to end. Amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, I thought the majority would be happy here.
Well, just remember that about 30% of the school population are foreign students, and from the UK students, only 2% are actually from the area. So, I guess it makes sense that people would miss home.
Yeah, but to want to actually quit school...
Well, they didn't want to exactly, they just thought about it.
Okay, so how should we organise the presentation? What did you guys decide?
Well, Kevin and I were saying that we should start by explaining what the topic of our research was, and how we decided to collect the data. So, I'll start by saying that our topic was how first-year students felt a month after beginning school, and how their attitudes progressed and changed by the end of the academic year.
So then we were thinking that I should explain that the population we want to study was obviously first-year students, but because we need their complete experience from the beginning to the end of their first year, we'd have to actually poll students in their second and third year. And then we said that you should explain how we access the population.
So I'll say that we got the permission from the school to go to different classes from different departments and hand out the surveys in paper form, right?
Right. And that it took us about 3 weeks to complete this part of our research.
So then we need to describe the 3 different areas of focus of our survey. So Lindsay can do that. Say that the survey had 3 sections. The first one asking just some general questions about the age, gender, nationality and field of study of each student. Then the second one focused on how they felt in their first 6 months at school. And the third, how they felt in the summer after their first year was complete.
That sounds good.
You now have 30 seconds to look at questions 26 to 30.
Okay, so let me see the breakdown. Okay, so we've got an equal distribution of boys and girls. That's good.
Almost equal. 51% of the participants were boys, the rest were girls.
Right, and 70% of the participants were British, while the other 30% were...
10% were from America and Asia, 2% were from Africa, and 18% were European. We had a small number of Australians as well, 0.03%, so I guess Europeans were 17.97% if you want to be precise.
Which we should. Anyway, and obviously the age was all 20 or 21, with a few 19-year-olds. Only about 5%. No, wait. 4%. Right?
No, it's 5%. Look.
Right. OK, so Lindsay will describe the 3 sections, and then you, Kevin, you'll describe the demographic and geographical breakdown, and
You can start with the graph, and then we'll all explain the data together.
Right, so we'll put this graph up on the board and explain that most students experience some form of homesickness or mild depression in the beginning of their course.
But we need to point out that by the end of the year, it was only 5% that still felt like quitting school.
Yeah, but remember that we didn't actually have the opportunity to interview or poll any of the students who left school, so the information we have only relates to current students, and those numbers might be bigger in reality.
Yeah, I guess we need to mention that. But we did check the dropout rate for the last 2 years, and it was very low, so at the end of the day, the numbers can't be much bigger.
Yeah. Anyway, so after we explain the data and we show the 3 graphs with the background information and the responses for 6 months and 1 year.
That is the end of part 3. Now turn to part 4.
You'll hear a talk given by a foreign correspondent. You have 30 seconds to look at questions 31 to 33.
Good evening. As I assume most of you are already aware, I have been asked to come here and talk to you, essentially give you a quick overview of the life of a foreign correspondent, along with a few tips on how to become a successful international reporter yourself, should this be a career choice you elect to pursue. So let me start by this. Don't become a foreign correspondent, at least not due to the romantic notions that come attached to this job, or what you've seen in the movies. Being a foreign correspondent does not mean exotic adventures. It doesn't mean finding yourself at the heart of the action and putting yourself in danger to inform the world. Let me just tell you this. 80 journalists are killed each year in the line of duty. Many more find themselves in prison or are attacked. You need to think hard. Is this the sort of career I want? Is this the kind of reporting I'm interested in? And only after you've carefully considered all the pros and cons should you decide. But let's focus on those of you who believe that, yes, you've got what it takes to be a foreign correspondent, and this is definitely why you decided to study journalism here. You're all third-year students, which means I don't need to waste my time telling you the basics. Of course, you need to read a lot. Books, novels, newspapers, blogs, and of course you need to be acceptably proficient in various media skills.
You now have 30 seconds to look at questions 34 to 37.
But what is it that's going to separate you from normal journalists and reporters? There are 4 things that'll make you different. The first thing is your experience of the world. You can't call yourself an international reporter unless you've been around and seen different places and different cultures. Seize every opportunity to visit other countries, meet people from around the world. It doesn't matter if it's business or leisure, just hop onto a plane and go everywhere. This will expand your horizons and sharpen your mind, something that, as a foreign correspondent, will help you understand better the culture of the country you'll be covering. And speaking of culture, this is a term you need to make sure you fully understand. What's culture? What makes a country's culture? Explore the culture of the country you're interested in. The music, the literature, the religion. Are there any cultural practices or conflicts you need to be aware of? Are there any tensions within the country? Why? The most important element of culture, of course, is the language. Do yourself a favour, whether you're planning to become a foreign correspondent or not. Learn a foreign language. So many of us are culpable for just sticking to just English, and while English is a very important language in the world, it would be foolish to think it's the only one. Pick a language whose sound you enjoy, a language you find interesting. Trust me, your future CV will thank you for it. And finally, history. Don't expect to be given a job as a foreign correspondent if you don't know anything about your target country's history. No piece of news is disconnected from the past. The whole world tells a story, and your coverage will suffer if you attempt to arrive in the middle with no reference to or understanding of what came before. The hows and whys always lurk in the past. Seek them.
You now have 30 seconds to look at questions 38 to 40.
Now, there's something else you need to understand. The world of international journalism is changing, like every other industry, due to the internet. The arrival of globalization brought with it a whole new set of rules, and you'll do well to comprehend what they mean for you. Unfortunately, gone are the days when a newspaper would hire you and deploy you to a country. Increasingly, newspapers around the world are beginning to favour freelance journalism, offering opportunities to local reporters with the necessary chutzpah and an understanding of the zeitgeist in their region. What this means for you is that you won't just have to start at the bottom. If you want to sustain yourself as an international reporter, you'll also have to pursue many different avenues at once. You'll need to persevere and push and build contacts everywhere. An old student of mine, a terrible student at university, but an incredibly intelligent woman, she came to find me at a conference that was recently held in Yemen, where I delivered a speech on the future of journalism. She was working for 3 different newspapers as a freelance foreign correspondent, one of them The Times, and she told me that the one piece of advice I gave her that stayed with her and helped her with her career was this: don't be afraid to fail. It will happen over and over again. It's how you deal with it that matters most. So keep this with you, this one piece of advice. Oh, and don't forget, your passports need to be kept current at all times. Thank you very much for listening.
That is the end of part 4.